Yes, that is absolutely the case, and of course there's a parallel with Europe on exactly that dimension. Most Americans, when you ask them, they like Social Security and they like Medicare, and those are big items in the federal government budget going forward. But they don't want to generally pay more tax themselves in order to support those programs. And that, of course, is a contradiction.
And so what do you think the answer is?
Well, you need to control spending, particularly on health care. And it's not just Medicare, it's not just the federal government of health care spending, it's all of health care spending. And that is a tough problem. At the same time, with an aging society, you need to have revenue. And the idea that you can somehow fix revenue as a percent of the economy at the level it's had in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, that is completely unrealistic. The demographics of the country have fundamentally changed. It's a great achievement. Americans who are age 65 today can expect to live 3 years longer on average than Americans who were 65 in 1970. But that creates costs on the social insurance schemes, on Social Security and on Medicare. Those costs have to be paid by someone, and just relying on increasing debt as a way to get through that is not a good idea.
So it brings up the whole tax question, obviously, and that's a dirty three-letter word throughout many parts of the United States. I mean, how do you get politicians to feel like they have a comfortable enough amount of cover so they can approach this from some sort of rational point of view?
Well, I think that's the hard question. I really expect in the run-up to the November election, you'll hear a lot about taxes, mostly competing proposals to cut taxes. And the revenue base in this country already is too low to sustain the kinds of social insurance programs we have in place, including particularly Medicare. So either you're going to wait for a crisis because you won't be able to fund the debt, or you're going to get ahead of this and take advantage of what is, at the moment, an unusually favorable global funding situation, and use that opportunity to bring the deficit and the debt under control.
So that brings up a question that I'm twigged to by Rosenberg. He's a chief economist and strategist here with a high net worth money management firm. You may remember him from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, when he was chief economist there, and he predicted the housing crash. But he said in one of his notes not that long ago that he expects massive austerity in the United States post-election. Do you think that that is possible, given the kind of votes we have seen against austerity in Europe in the past week or so?
No, I don't think you'll see massive austerity in the United States. It is true there are some big decisions coming, and the end of this year is really very important. If the politicians decide to do nothing, that is a huge decision, by the way, which has decades-long consequences. I think in the end they will reach some sort of compromise. It will be messy. There will be a lot of screaming and shouting. There may well be the kind of news that disrupts markets. I would not rule that out. But I think ultimately U.S. fiscal policy will not fall off any kind of cliff. The question is, do the leaders on both sides of the aisle take advantage of the opportunity to really put the budget on a more sustainable footing? If they can do that, then they can really transform the role of the United States in the world economy. It wouldn't take much in economic terms, but politically, we're asking for acts of leadership that we haven't seen for quite some time from both the Democrats and the Republicans.
You call it dysfunctional, a dysfunctional political system that can't make fiscally responsible choices. That's what you've said.
Yeah, look, frankly, the biggest problem is the Republicans are dug in very, very hard on no increase in taxes for anyone under any circumstances. This is a position that will be very difficult to square, continuing social insurance programs, including Social Security, but particularly Medicare. And it may be that in the November election, the Paul Ryan budget, Paul Ryan is the chair of the House Budget Committee, the Republican, it may be that his budget proposals become a central issue, And we'll see what the American people decide on that basis. Most likely they'll be deciding on the basis of slogans and competing representations of what could happen, and subsequent to the election there has to be some compromise. But both sides have to compromise. If the Republicans refuse to budge on taxes, it is going to be very, very difficult politically and for us in the financial markets.
Before I get to a couple of specific tax proposals, I just want to ask you very simply, why not austerity? I mean, why shouldn't people get used to the idea that maybe they're going to have to do with less?
Well, look, I think that if your definition of austerity is bringing the budget more nearly under control, then that is absolutely what we need. But our point is the United States, fortunately, and through a lot of good luck more than anything else, is in a position where it can make that adjustment gradually over a period of 2 decades, as opposed to being Greece that has to do it in 2 months, or Italy that has to do it in 2 years. So the U.S. politicians should recognize the moment and get on with making that a fiscal adjustment, which includes paying higher taxes if you want to maintain social insurance programs. Paying high taxes is absolutely a form of austerity. You're paying more for the services that are going to be delivered to you now and in the future.
Let's talk about a couple of those. A carbon tax and a consumption tax. I think you and I have talked about a consumption tax before, and there are certain people in the United States who are in favor of it. I spoke with Edward Lazier last week out in Los Angeles, former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under W. Bush. He was even saying he's in favor of it, which is quite stunning.
Well, actually, I think when you talk to informed people, not just economists, that there's a lot of support for some form of consumption tax or value-added tax, a VAT, for example, along Canadian lines. We should be taxing consumption more and income less. The problem is when you get to the politics, the Democrats don't like the VAT because they see it as regressive, favoring the people at the top of the income distribution, which is true, actually. And the Republicans don't like it because they see it as an add-on tax that would just, in their view, facilitate an expansion of the size of government. So I don't see yet anything like a consensus that would bring you closer to a consumption tax.
What about a substantial carbon tax, particularly given that the United States pays so little on a relative basis for a gallon of gasoline?
Yeah, so again, on a 2-decade basis, we think there should be a carbon tax and also a gasoline tax to move the U.S. vehicle fleet away from being so inefficient in terms of consuming gasoline. This is a big issue of national security. The U.S. economic industrial powerhouse was based on domestic energy resources. We have a lot of resources, for example, in oil and gas shale, and if we take North America as a whole, including Canadian resources, we could realistically become more nearly self-sufficient. But not at these prices. At these prices, people are going to drive enormous vehicles that burn a lot of gasoline. Over 2 decades, we need to move away from that. There's also the issues of pollution and health effects of using as much gasoline as we do. We should handle that with a change in the tax system. But, of course, this is one of our least popular proposals.
There's just a couple minutes left. You know, we're as you probably know, we're discussing a lot of this kind of stuff here as well. We have an aging boomer population, although our fiscal house is a little bit different than in the United States, obviously, because of what happened in the 1990s. We still have major structural issues, particularly in the provinces, healthcare and so forth. Could we end up in this kind of situation as well, in your view?
Well, no one is exempt from fiscal disaster, and all countries go through some version of this. But I think the situation in Canada is a little bit like the current situation in Sweden, actually. Sweden also had a crisis in the 1990s. They got burned, both on the banking system and with regards to the obligations of the government, what they were promising people in all kinds of ways. And they're now very careful on their budget, and they learned the hard lessons the right way, and I think Canada's the same, and particularly when you see the irresponsibility in the United States, both with regard to debt management and with regard to the healthcare system. I think and I hope that inspires Canadians to do somewhat better. So I'm guardedly optimistic about the Canadian prospects.
All right, sir, we will leave it there. A great pleasure having you back with us. Many thanks, Simon.